Brett Kavanaugh and the White House tried to put a period on the sentence after the most tumultuous month of his life, certainly. Sworn in as the 114th Supreme Court Justice about 3 months after he was nominated in that same space by President Trump. And a lot to talk about what happened in that East Room of the White House. We see Ruth Bader Ginsburg there. She was the only of the 8 justices there to watch the ceremony who did not clap when Kavanaugh came out. We see Clarence Thomas with a big hug there. The other liberals, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, they all clapped as Kavanaugh came out. And then the president gave a pretty fiery speech for the occasion, calling what's happened in recent weeks the politics of personal destruction, and saying Kavanaugh has been proven innocent. The justice himself, though, took a much more conciliatory tone, saying the Supreme Court is not a partisan institution. He plans to be a team player, and insisting, I thought notably, that this process didn't change me. He said, I finish it with no bitterness and a promise to be a justice who will focus on the stability and unity of the court. Caitlin Huey-Burns is with me here at the desk. Caitlin, a lot to dig through in this last half hour. But if we can step back, my goodness, 2.5 years ago, Merrick Garland nominated as a justice, Democrats and liberals ready to take control of the court, and now 2.5 years later, a massive victory for the conservative movement.
Right now they have 2 Supreme Court justices, and especially with this seat replacing Kennedy, who was considered the swing seat on this court, there is a lot of criticism from Democrats that this will move the court to the right. What was really interesting was that Kavanaugh spoke and that he tried to hit 2 different points. First of all, he tried to strike that conciliatory tone and make it clear that he wants to be bipartisan, nonpartisan, that he takes this job as a judge seriously. Remember, during his confirmation hearing, during the testimony, after the testimony from Christine Blasey Ford, there was a lot of criticism of the way in which he handled that he expressed anger, that there were questions raised about his temperament and fitness for the court. He is trying to kind of smooth that over here. He also talked a lot about women. Of course, that is the biggest part of this story. He said that he has picked 4 women to clerk from him, which would be history-making for the court, and he very much played that up into the speech. So trying to move forward from what has been a contentious battle in terms of the confirmation fight, but also has to know that this is something that will continue to linger. We're heading into a midterm election year. These emotions and the reaction to this still very raw, and a lot of folks having very mixed reactions.
To put it mildly, Kathryn Watson is a White House reporter for CBSNews.com. She's in the East Room. Katie, I've rarely heard that room so raucous. Paint the scene that you just saw there.
Certainly. Well, one of the first things I would say is that when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell walked in, there was resounding applause and a standing ovation even. This is really seen as a huge victory for Republicans and the president after this undeniably contentious last few weeks. So I would say it was certainly an era of celebration here at the White House as the president's 2nd Supreme Court nominee was celebrated and confirmed and sworn in for a 2nd time.
The president made it political tonight, so I feel okay turning to politics so quickly after the swearing-in ceremony. Despite so many people feeling so bad about this process, Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, have suggested recently this could be good for them in the midterms. Why do they think so?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the president himself has called it a rallying cry for the GOP. I think that Republicans ahead of this election have been a little bit lukewarm, if you will. But many Republicans I've spoken to say that this entire Kavanaugh situation has really riled up the base and given them an issue that they can surround themselves around and really, as the president put it, become a rallying cry for the base for many. So we're just a few weeks out from the midterms, of course. We'll see if that momentum holds, but it's one of the few things that the GOP really feels that they can hold on to right now.
The other thing it's done is it's coalesced a fractured Republican Party. All these never-Trumpers, when it was a conservative nominee being put up, all of a sudden you saw a consensus around Republicans and conservatives that we really haven't seen in a couple years. We saw Kavanaugh name check George W. Bush, in whose White House he worked for. And though the president may have smirked a bit, the room applauded. Were there any signs in the room of these two parts of the Republican Party being in the same space and for the first time in a long time being on the same page?
Well, not tonight. I would say it was certainly just an air of unity throughout the room. It was, I would add, just as a note of color, fascinating to see all now 9 of the current Supreme Court justices in the room at the same time. I was trying to get a read on their reactions from the angle where I was at. They were, pretty, I wouldn't say stone-faced, but very much respectful, looking on, even of the ones who will probably disagree with Kavanaugh on the court. But as far as the individuals who were here, it was certainly many people who have helped get Kavanaugh confirmed or have talked him up on Fox News. So around the room, I would say certainly while there were some very much establishment Republicans who may not have always or may not always be in line with the president on everything, everyone was unified tonight, Brooks.
Yeah, I'm curious if you did see any more what you saw of the other 8, because they were in our shot only at the beginning, and then I think I saw one cutaway where Stephen Breyer seemed to chuckle at a joke, but it was hard to get a look at the other justices. From what we saw, Ruth Bader Ginsburg seemed not to applaud when Kavanaugh came out. Could you see any interaction? Did any of them go up to Kavanaugh at the end? I don't think they had a chance. What did you see?
Sure. Well, that reaction or lack thereof, I guess, from Ruth Bader Ginsburg was probably the most telling moment, the most interesting response. For the most part, at least from the angle where I was, where I could see a handful of the justices, they were all very much just looking on, respectful, and Kavanaugh himself said that, hey, this is a team of 9. He recognized that it was a contentious process. He didn't really talk about the allegations, although the president touched on them. But he said Kavanaugh really tried to make the case tonight that, hey, I know it's been a little bit of a contentious process, but I am a team player. I'm going to be an impartial judge. So it was an air of unity and at least one of respect from the justices and the ones who may not agree with Kavanaugh on every decision or agree with the process.
Caitlin, here at the desk, what else struck you about this and how it ends what's been an incredibly contentious chapter in that town and in this country?
Well, they're certainly trying to close this chapter, but again, we're in a midterm election season, and this is something that I think both parties are going to continue to harp on. Katie brought up a good point, which is that this has been a rallying cry for the Republican Party and something that has coalesced the Republicans around Donald Trump, and it's also something they hope to keep up over the next couple of weeks. That could be difficult to do. We'll see if they can do that. Meanwhile, Democrats still feel burned by this, and they still feel energized by the response, the negative response to Kavanaugh.
Their base has to be energized by this. How could he not?
Exactly. So the question I have is whether the Supreme Court fight now becomes an organizing principle for Democrats the way it has traditionally been for Republicans. We see that Republicans tend to turn out for the possibility to shape the makeup of the courts, not only the Supreme Court, but judgeships around the country. Now we're starting to see Democrats say, we need to get involved in that fight. We need to get people to come out and vote in order to shape the courts. That hasn't been something that's worked for them in the past. We'll see if it starts to be different this time around. And this is an example of elections having consequences. And I think that will be the message coming from Democrats, but also coming from Republicans. I think you'll hear them say the same tune, kind of talking about how much this really matters.
Judge Kavanaugh will be part of this first ever oral arguments tomorrow morning, a case on what constitutes a violent felony. And it begins for him. And Kathryn Watson and Caitlin Huey-Burns, we thank you both for your time. We're going to take a quick break. Much more news ahead. You're streaming CBSN.